at 12:01 on Sunday. This video from this morning in suburban Virginia shows McCabe leaving home. He took the unusual step of going to Main Justice here in Washington Thursday to plead his case and preserve his government pension. We are told the most likely outcome if he's fired is that his government pension will be reduced because the legal bar is so high to take the pension away altogether. The recommendation to terminate McCabe grew out of the independent review of the FBI and Justice Department's handling of the Clinton email case by the Justice Department's Inspector General Michael E. Horowitz. Fox News is told that McCabe was not forthcoming with investigators and may have deliberately misled them or even lied. After FBI Director James Comey was fired by the president in last year, McCabe testified to Congress that he and the Bureau are above politics.
Has the dismissal of Mr. Comey in any way impeded, interrupted, stopped, or negatively impacted any of the work, any investigation, or any ongoing projects at the Federal Bureau of Investigations?
So there has been no effort to impede our investigation to date. Quite simply put, sir, you cannot stop the men and women of the FBI from doing the right thing, protecting the American people, and upholding the Constitution.
Two former FBI agents told Fox today that there is anger among some rank and file over McCabe and the amount of shame that he has brought to the Bureau if he's not fired. The former agents said they expect the anger will shift to the new FBI Director Christopher Wray and Attorney General Jeff Sessions for not taking action because a more junior agent would be fired for cause for lying. Charles.
Catherine, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Reaction now from former Republican Congressman and Fox News contributor, Colonel Allen West. Colonel West, the clock is ticking. What do you think? How would you handicap this for us?
Well, it's good to be with you, Charles. And basically, Catherine Harris just laid the entire case out. If you recall, your former Fox News colleague, Greta Van Susteren, coined an incredible phrase. She said that Washington, D.C. is the city of no consequences. And if this is allowed to happen once again, we will see and we will send a message to everyday Americans that there is something about Washington, D.C. where you can mislead, you can lie, you can deceive, you cannot be forthcoming with the truth, and you still get to skate away. We saw that happen with Lois Lerner with the IRS, and I just cannot continue to understand why it continues. You and I served in the United States military, and one of the things that I told subordinate soldiers and also subordinate commanders was that once you sacrifice and give up your integrity, I have no need for you in my unit or my organization. So now we know that here is a deputy director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation that is guilty of lying, that is guilty of deception and misleading and leaking important information. And why should the American taxpayers now pay him for the rest of his life?
Colonel West, and to that point, Catherine also made the point of the rank and file. I think they've come under a tremendous amount of criticism, undue criticism, if you will, because of what's happened to folks much higher in the food chain in their misdeeds and misconducts along the way. And if he is not disciplined in the same manner that he himself would discipline one of them, surely this would crush the esprit de corps there.
You're absolutely right, and that's the exact same thing you would see in a unit. If a senior commander or a senior officer were able to get away with something that the privates and the corporals and the sergeants knew that they could not do, that destroys a unit. You know, I'm down here right now in Fort Lauderdale in Broward County, and think about this. Who was the FBI agent that did not pass on the tips and the information related to Nicholas Cruz? It's those type of cancers that you have in the Federal Bureau of Investigation that the rank and file everyday agents who are out there busting their tails are sick and tired of them being castigated in the same big lump of distrust, because that's what we seem to have now of the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
What do you make that we are now counting down the clock? In other words, this decision hasn't already been made, and a lot of pressure, obviously, and scrutiny on Attorney General Jeff Sessions with respect to this and some of the other things that have gone on recently.
Well, I think it's appalling that we're having to play count down the clock. This is a very cut and dry case. As soon as the IG report from Mr. Horowitz was released, Department of Justice, the Attorney General should have taken the appropriate actions and now allow it to come down to this last-minute decision. This is not something very hard, and that's the nature of leadership. Leadership is about taking that hard right over the easy left, and I think that Attorney General Sessions needs to make this decision. I don't see what he's waiting around for.
Colonel West, there's some discussion or disagreement whether the entire pension could be taken away, or should he lose some sort of rank, or there be another mechanism to mitigate or lower the pension? Do you understand how that works? Is it possible for him not to receive the entire pension?
I think that that is the decision that the American taxpayer who will be writing that check to him should be able to make. One of the greatest disgraces that you could have as an officer in the United States Army would be convicted of conduct unbecoming, and therefore you would lose your pension if you were looking at having a full career. And that's the exact same thing here. He did not serve with honor all the way to the last moment of his time and service there with the Federal Bureau of Investigations. And again, it's this no consequences that just frustrates people. You know, you and I, if we had been in the military and had a private email server in our quarters or in our barracks and we were doing classified information, neither one of us would be here on Fox News today. We'd probably still be in Fort Leavenworth. And that is what's so frustrating to people.
And also the fact that it was an independent review of the FBI, their own inspector general, who's come to this conclusion. Again, it makes it feel like this is a slam dunk, and why all the drama?
And that's the thing. I mean, why do we have to have this drama? I know it's March Madness. I'd rather see the drama played out on a basketball court. But it would be madness if we allowed Andrew McCabe to retire with a full pension from the American taxpayers, just the same as his madness that Lois Lerner got the same thing when how many times did she plead the Fifth Amendment? And again, I would say that for whatever reason, the former governor of Virginia, Terry McAuliffe, was able to give hundreds of thousands of dollars to his wife for her state Senate campaign. I think Terry McAuliffe can finance his pension as well.
You know, we talked about the esprit de corps within the FBI, rank and file certainly, and I think the American public also would like to see sort of be able to trust and believe in the FBI as one of our preeminent law agencies. Are you comfortable now with the folks who are in charge there, or do you think there should be additional changes?
No, absolutely not. I think that we have something wrong with the at the head of the snake up there in Washington, D.C., and we need to have a wholesale change, because right now the American people see an incredible amount of hypocrisy. I think that the rank and file agents there in the FBI see the duplicitous hypocrisy, and something needs to change, because if you cannot trust the #1 law enforcement agency in the United States of America, then who can you trust?
Colonel West, thank you very much. Always appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you, Charles.
And now to that deadly collapse of a pedestrian bridge in Florida. At least 6 deaths have been confirmed, but officials say that the death toll could go higher. Steve Harrigan is in Miami with the latest. Steve.
Charles, surveillance video released just a short time ago shows the exact moment when that 950-ton concrete bridge collapsed. It occurred at 1:30 in the afternoon on Thursday. A number of cars stopped at a red light, and in just a moment, at least 8 of those cars were pinned. At least 6 people have been killed. The first person has been identified, Alexa Duran. She's 18 years old, a political science major here at FIU. She was in a gray Toyota SUV, and her heartbroken father posted in Spanish, "My little girl was trapped in the car and couldn't get out." So agony for him and agony for the families of at least 5 others. It's been really difficult to reach the dead inside that rubble, to do it in a careful, dignified manner. We've seen some digging and some jackhammers going today, but really slow and tough going to reach them. We're going to see 2 investigations here really at the same time. On the one hand, a police homicide investigation. On the other hand, an NTSB investigation into this bridge to try and determine what made it fall. That investigation is likely to take at least a week before we can get any answers at all to this tragedy. Charles, back to you.
Steve, thank you very much. We'll be talking with someone later in the show how this tragedy actually happened and how we can make sure that it never happens again. And forget about the Russians meddling in our elections. Now they're meddling in our every way of life. We'll be right back.
Crying foul on chaos. Why the White House shakeups are really a good thing. Plus, inside the new push to make your tax cuts permanent. Saturday on Cavuto Live.
You might take something for your heart or joints, but do you take something for your brain? With an ingredient originally found in
Imagine Sandals, the world's only 5-star luxury included resorts. Call 1-800-SANDALS.
From Russia without love. The administration accusing Russia of targeting our power grid with cyber attacks going all the way back to 2015, potentially leading to massive power failures across the country. Fox News Channel's Kevin Cork joins us with the latest from the White House. Kevin.
Hey there, my friend. Listen, the White House has made it very clear, Charles, that this is just part of an ongoing process. Frankly, to punish Russia for destabilizing activities, you're going to see many more sanctions coming down the pike. Some of them will be more subtle. Others you will learn about very quickly. But certainly this is just the first of several actions taken by the administration. Let me just refresh and let everybody know what we're talking about in terms of sanctions. And these are somewhat significant as I roll a few of these out for you. First of all, the targeted sanctions really hit the Russian nationals and entities that were charged back in February. You may remember this happened when the special counsel Bob Mueller sort of rolled this out. Well, these folks were accused of tampering in the U.S. election last fall. But also, as you pointed out right before the break, it's much bigger than that, Charles. This time, the government is accusing Russia of remotely targeting the U.S. power grid. In fact, the Department of Homeland Security called it a multi-stage effort by the Kremlin to target specific government entities and critical infrastructure dating all the way back to 2015. Pretty incredible stuff. By the way, this is all happening as the U.S. co-signed that multinational statement blaming Moscow for the brazen nerve agent attack on a Russian double agent and his daughter. That took place on British soil earlier this month. So I guess the question is, whatever happened to so-called Russia reset, right? Remember that? Well, so much for the last administration's posture. Here's this administration's State Department spokesman, Heather Nauert.
Let me remind you that sanctions are ongoing. Just because sanctions are put in place on one day, March 15th, does not mean that additional sanctions won't be put in place in the coming days and in the coming weeks and in the coming months. These tend to happen in batches, and we've seen this before, and we'll continue to look at this.
Yeah, we have seen these happen in bunches before. So you may be asking yourself, what do the Russians have to say about this? Well, here's Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister. He said this today. We have stopped paying attention to this, just as we've stopped getting anxious, although we never have been, about newer and newer sanctions. He actually called it unfair and despicable and other things like that, Charles. They are not happy about it, but certainly they're not saying a great deal because it looks to me like they were caught red-handed. Back to you.
All right, Kevin, thank you very, very much again. Election meddling, serious stuff. Shutting down our power system, well, that's dangerous stuff. And it's the kind of stuff that has former CIA operative Mike Baker concerned, very concerned. Mike, you know, it's interesting because when we think about national defense and the things that we're most at risk of, we think of war, we think of a lot of things, but we don't think really about the grid, which seems to be extremely vulnerable.
Right. No, absolutely. Look, for years now, if you think what are the top risks to the United States, to our national security, typically it's always the same three. It's Russia, China, and Iran. But when you get in a room and you talk to intel officials, military, and others and say, what is it that keeps you up at night? What are you most worried about? It is an attack on our power grid or on our critical infrastructure, but normally our power grid, which is, at the end of the day, an aging infrastructure that was never, ever designed to withstand physical terror attacks or certainly cyber attacks. So this is a significant problem, but it has been a problem, to be fair. This has been a problem for years, right? It's not just in the past year or 2 years, as some are seeming to imply, right, that the Russians and the Chinese, who are in fact the actual #1 perpetrator of cyber shenanigans, have been poking and prodding and testing and probing and trying to map out our critical infrastructure through cyberspace. It has been going on for the better part of the past decade.
You know, in the past, to your point, when I've read stories about this, it's been suggested that these are test runs that find the vulnerabilities, and that ultimately, though, that it could be a bad actor, not even a Russia or China, but someone a lot more nefarious that could go in there and really cripple us, that we're extremely vulnerable and we could be crippled at this very moment.
Right, that's absolutely correct. Look, whether it's a state sponsor entity, a Kremlin-backed, Kremlin-linked entity, or a pseudo-state associated entity, or hackers or anarchists, whomever, usually, I'm simplifying, but there's two main reasons for all the poking, the prodding, the probing of our infrastructure, the power grid, the water, the transportation sector. It's either to gather information from research, development, intellectual property, theft of information, economic espionage, or oftentimes it is, again, it's this mapping for the future, looking for ways into the command and control, the actual physical operations of this infrastructure for that day in the future, perhaps, when the next war is fought in cyberspace. We've been a little bit slow to the gate in dealing with this from our political perspective and also from our practical logistical perspective. The Pentagon is still grappling with this idea of what constitutes an act of war in cyberspace.
Wow. I tell you what, I hope they don't have to find out the hard way. Mike Baker, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Charles.
I want to take a quick look at the corner of Wall and Broad. The Dow closing higher today, but stocks, well, stumbled this week. The Dow, NASDAQ, and S&P 500 all lower this week. More after this. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer slamming the GOP tax cuts as a gift for the rich. But that's not stopping Republicans from trying to push ahead with phase 2 of tax reform, including making those individual tax cuts permanent. Is this a winning issue for Republicans? Let's ask Kristen Tate, Dan Gertrude, and Danielle McLaughlin. Kristen, let me start with you. I thought it was a slam dunk winning message for Republicans, and perhaps Chuck Schumer's misreading that Pennsylvania outcome.
Yeah, the tax cuts are a big winning issue for Republicans ahead of midterms. A lot of voters don't even realize how much money they'll save from the tax bill, and they won't realize these savings until they file their taxes in 2019. So GOPers need to be aggressive in pushing this message, but it's also critical that Republicans align their opponents with Nancy Pelosi, who of course called the savings crumbs. She is toxic, and any midterm candidate who's perceived as having strong ties with her will be hurt among former Blue Dog Democrats who voted Trump in 2016 because they feel alienated and forgotten by today's Democratic Party.
Of course, I think, Dan, that the Republicans don't hope that it takes until the next tax season for people to realize the benefits of the tax cuts. Hopefully, people are seeing it now already when they get their checks at the bottom line. But whether it's Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer, it seems to me a flawed premise to go after these tax cuts because they are impacting people positively.
Yes, they are. I mean, right now, people are seeing a difference in their paychecks here and now, that immediate gratification. So I think the tax cuts are paying dividends, political and otherwise, at this point.
Of course, Danielle, Nancy Pelosi sort of taking credit for Conor Lamb's victory, although he ran against her as much as he ran against anyone else, even more so than Donald Trump. And he did tout tax cuts as one of the things that he liked.
Yeah, he did say that he needed to see leadership change at the top of the Democratic Party. He said the same thing about the Republican Party, in all fairness. I think that Republicans may do phase 2 because I think politically it makes sense as we come into midterms. I think honestly that the president may be toxic. If he was toxic in Pennsylvania, we may see a little bit of that moving around as we move into midterms. But the tax cuts are interesting because they're very, very popular with Republicans, but they're not that popular with Democrats. And so we have people in the middle who might go one way or the other. It's going to be interesting to see how each party
I will say, though, today we had a report out from the University of Michigan on consumer confidence, and it shot up to near an all-time high. And what really drove it was the bottom one-third of income households had a 16% percentage point gain month over month. Unheard of. I mean, so some people out there at the lower end of the economic spectrum, Kristen, are excited about this. I don't think polls capture that.
Oh, yeah, the economy's booming. People are making more money. The job market's great. But still, Charles, I'm not sure if that will be enough for Republicans going into midterms. It will definitely help them. The one thing Republicans need to keep in mind when they're running is that they need to run as real conservatives to appeal to that populist base. They cannot run as establishment-type candidates like Jeff Flake or John McCain. They need to really
but those guys aren't running. So, Cohen, was he a good candidate or a bad candidate?
Sorry.
In Pennsylvania, succumbed.
Oh, he was a good candidate because he was more moderate. He never said a bad word about Trump. He was pro-Second Amendment. He won in spite of
You're talking
Nancy
about Connor
Pelosi.
Lamb, but I mean
Yes.
the Republicans, Dan, you know, it's like, I think they've got the platform, right? I think the tax cuts, the economy, the consumer sentiment number I'm talking about today, real hard stuff is looking phenomenal for them. But in this case, Connor Lamb was able to usurp their own message.
Yes, basically, he took on the Republican message of people are going to vote with their wallet, and people are experiencing a windfall from these tax cuts. That's a winning play in my mind.
We got some time between now and November. So, Dan, does a Republican Party, does President Trump, do they focus on phase 2 tax cuts, infrastructure, or some sort of DACA border deal?
I think they're gonna give it a shot with tax cuts part 2. And the reason I say that is the president, he's a winner. He knows how to win. He sees that as a winning plan for him. I think he's going to push that hard. Don't know if he can get it, Charles, but he's going to push it.
No Democrats voted for the first tax bill, and we do know that was a huge mistake. If they pushed it again, would any Democrats come across? Because Connor Lamb has sort of shown you guys the light. I mean, I think he's showing you the light. He's giving you the template for how to win in 2018.
This is what the Republican Party has to grapple with. Trump won as a populist, and what Nancy Pelosi really meant when she said crumbs was that the 1% in corporate America get far more out of this tax bill than average working Americans. And populism is purportedly about those average working class Americans. Only about 30% of people are seeing increases in their tax cuts. Even the pass-through benefits that we're seeing are overwhelmingly slanted towards the 1%. So we're seeing everything from, there's a lot going on at the top 1%. Well, what are they going to do
We'll
about
see
it?
Politics of envy. You know, if I get a pay raise, I'm not really concerned if someone got a bigger one than me.
Right.
I'm just happy when I can keep more of what I earn. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Well, officials are trying to get to the bottom of why that bridge collapsed in Florida. This as the search for victims continues.
And there was this young boy in the back of the car with full of blood and just basically speaking, begging for someone to help him. And that's something that I'm not going to be able to get out of my head because I'm a mother of a kid too. And I just see that boy with his hand out the window just crying for help.
The investigation continues into Florida, into that deadly bridge collapse. Now authorities say cables suspending the pedestrian bridge were being tightened after a stress test when the structure came crashing down. Phil Keating is in Miami with more on the investigation. Phil.
Charles, that has been confirmed by the mayor of Miami-Dade County, Carlos Jimenez, and the National Transportation Safety Board, of course, is incorporating that and everything else, engineering, design, construction, as they are also on the scene here to investigate how this pedestrian walkway, reputed to be state-of-the-art when it was installed and built, suddenly collapsed roughly 5 days after it was actually erected across this span of 8 lanes of traffic. 6 people confirmed dead now, either working on the bridge or in their vehicles driving, when suddenly the 1 million pounds of concrete came crashing down on top of them and onto Southwest 8th Street. One of the bodies was actually recently, in the past half an hour, 45 minutes, recovered from a vehicle that had been exposed after the rubble on top of it had finally been removed, allowing investigators and fire rescue on the scene to pull the body, deceased of course, out of the vehicle and then take that body away. Family members were believed to be seen standing by on the scene here. There are really 6 families that we know of that are all in a state of, suspect, in that they can only assume their loved one, who was known to be in the area yesterday under blue skies, suddenly can't get a hold of them anymore, but they believe their car is underneath all that rubble. The problem is there's 950 tons of concrete rubble that are crushing all of these 8 cars that they are aware of. Investigators say there still could be additional cars beneath all of the rubble, and that could also mean additional victims. So that will be revealed once this big crane that's been donated by a local crane operator to remove these heavy pieces over the next several days reveal what's exactly down underneath the pile of the rubble. As for the collaboration between MCM Construction, based out of Miami, and Fig Bridge Design, based out of Tallahassee, the companies have worked in the bridge and construction business for decades. FIG, however, was fined in 2012 after a bridge that was built in Virginia collapsed on a railroad tracks. That injured several workers. And MCM, well, it was accused of substandard work when a makeshift bridge collapsed at Florida International Airport. That was a makeshift bridge temporary for workers, and a man walking across it, a TSA employee, fell, broke several bones, and filed a lawsuit against MCM. And OSHA records show that MCM has actually been fined for 11 safety violations over the years, amounting to about $50,000. So the work here at the scene continues. They are still removing these huge, heavy slabs of concrete. And as they can get to those bodies and extricate them from the vehicles, then and only then can they be positively and officially ID'd. So, like I said at the top, the investigators with the Miami-Dade County, they really want to preserve the dignity for those families who right now are experiencing this empty void of assuming their loved one has passed under this bridge, but not knowing with certainty until the body is pulled out and positively ID'd. But within the past hour, the first one has come out of those 5 known to be still under there.
We're talking about how to build new infrastructure and do safe and secure construction practices so we can rebuild the infrastructure.
So let's go to this one specific issue, though, Oliver, because we're hearing, there's a stress test. And of course, when we heard that, most people were shocked that there would be, traffic going on while you would have a stress test. And then apparently there were some cables involved, and something went horribly wrong there.
Yes. The key thing that's missing here is the mid-support span. This is a 170-foot span bridge, Charles, and then there needed to be a mid-tower support. When you swing the bridge 90 degrees to the other side of the highway, you need to have a support in the middle. And when you don't have that support, our calculations have shown with my students last night that this produced a 140% increase in the mid-span deflection, which caused the collapse. When you have a mid-support there, then you have a negative bending moment there that will support the curvature, and then therefore you split the spans into 87-foot spans, and therefore the bridge would not collapse under its own weight. It was carrying about 5.5 tons per linear foot across the bridge, and that's way too heavy. We had 140% increase in over deflection, very, very maximum bending stresses that were taking place in the middle of the span when they should have been negative bending stresses. And more importantly, basically what you look at it is a bridge smiles between supports and it frowns over interior supports. So in this case, we had no interior support tower, so how could the beam frown over the interior support?
In short, and you're starting to break up here a little bit, but I do want to know in short, and of course we'll have an official, probably report in about a week or so, but is your assessment from looking at this and studying it that it certainly could have been avoided, this tragedy?
Yes, it could have been. Yes, it could have been avoided, Charles, and I have an article on my website, and I just tweeted it out at olivermcgee.org that explains the cause that I've just described to you for this crash.
Oliver,
for this bridge crash.
Thank you very much for your expertise, and we'll check out that article.
Thank you.
Well, the criticism of Hillary Clinton's comments on women who